Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I have a fellowship at the Business School and at the Newcomb Institute studying gender and narrativity and fiber, and I just want to quilt. So, copyright librarian Sara Benson joins us. She's got a new book out. We talk about it. We talk about copyright in the library and in the context of quilters. And I asked her the question, has anyone ever been sued for photocopying too much in a library?
Hi, so my name is Sara Benson. I am calling from beautiful Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. I am the copyright librarian at the University of Illinois Library.
Awesome. And tell me, do you have any first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
Oh, wow. My mother is not a quilter, but she is an avid sewer. And she was, making different things for my room, curtains and things like that. She actually put together the curtains for my daughter's bedroom. That's the latest thing that I've asked her to do. I'm not much of a sewer myself. I'm very impatient, and that doesn't go well with sewing. But right. my grandmother was very much into knitting. Oh. And I still have some of her pieces that she made for me as a child and a baby. And my daughter has worn them growing up, and she used to sew into the tag that it was lovingly made by Pauline Grossman. It was so cute. So we still have those tags in there.
That's very, very sweet. That's very sweet. It's a very different story. My mom used to sew a lot, and she got way into making underwear, and she kept sewing our names into our underwear, which was terrible, terrible, because we did theater, and sometimes underwears get lost, and people would hold up these ridiculously embarrassing underwear. So when I think about labels, I just think about like the humiliation of, someone
That's right.
holding it up. It was out of love, she ordered special labels that had our names on them, but had our full name, like our last name too. Like,
oh goodness.
My God.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of the days of the week underwear and like what happened to Saturday and Sunday, and Sunday is the holy day.
Right. No underwear on Sunday.
Right.
Yeah. What's that
And then
about?
someone gets mad because he's like, you've been cheating on me. Where's Sunday?
Where's Sunday? Exactly. And then I don't know about you, but like children that are way obsessed, like it has to be Tuesday. It's Tuesday. You're just like,
right.
Why did I buy these?
Today is Tuesday. I have to wear Tuesday today.
Right. You're just like, okay, that was a bad choice.
It was really bad. I don't think I ever had personally any of those underwear, but I just remember them vividly, and there were so many jokes that were made about them, and so it's just like a coming of age. And they don't make them anymore. At least I haven't seen them.
Oh, I'll have to look for them. That's funny. Okay, so we know each other because of our mutual love of copyright. Would you say?
I would say that we
and you love
fall into the category of copyright nerddom.
Yeah. Totally.
And I do love copyright. I find it really fun because it's an area of law that is involved in all of creativity, and that is really exciting. My husband is an artist. He's a graphic designer, and so there's so much overlap there, and it's so fun to see where the creativity comes in to play with everything that people come up with, right? I mean, it's just so fascinating. I love fiction and fiction writing, and so I think it's a fun area of law. I mean, of course, it gets very, very difficult, very, very fast, as you know. But I enjoy a challenge too. I like it when it's hard, because then you can try to figure out what the answer is, and then that's when it becomes more fun. The everyday easier questions are not the most fun.
No, and as a librarian, so I think like librarians have always played and archivists have always played a really important role in our culture of preserving culture, making it accessible, fighting the good fight. Like, librarians are really, really important. And so what role does a librarian play within this sort of sphere of copyright? What do you say to that?
Well, I teach at the iSchool here at University of Illinois, and I find that copyright pervades librarianship. I mean, it's so, especially in the modern age with digitization at our fingertips. Of course, the obvious thought goes to the Google Books case, and we're still digitizing things for the Hathi Trust through Google.
So just pause for just a second, because people may not know what you're talking about. So explain what the Google Books project was and what Hathi Trust is.
So Google was partnering with libraries to digitize hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of books, and then they were providing these very high quality copies to the Hathi Trust, which is a digital library, and they
started this in like 2005, 2006, right?
I think that's right.
Right. And they were not getting permission to copy these books. They were just going for it.
Correct.
Right?
They were not getting permission to copy the books, and they weren't doing it. They weren't doing it exclusively for preservation, which would be, of course, an exception under the Copyright Act. But they were doing it under fair use grounds because
they were so weird. So I was like, I was sort of just coming to be a professor when all of this happened. So it was really interesting. They kept shifting what they were saying they were doing. That was what was so interesting.
What the rationale was. I mean, the rationale today, right? It may be different.
Right, exactly. So they were like, first it was, fair use. We can scan these books and make them available as an index, right? We're indexing it so you can find stuff. But then they were like, but maybe we could like publish them or have print on demand or put portals in libraries. They got big. They had started to think too big, and people freaked out on them. And then there was court cases, and then they went back to fair use. Would you say that's about kind of like they got bigger, and then it got back? No, we're just doing it for fair use.
I think that's right, because I know there was like an Orphan Works arm of it that was looking into making them more available, especially for the ones that were hard to find the copyright owner. And then I know they scaled that part back. And they were also asserting an argument for accessibility, which they did assert in the lawsuit. And since the Marrakesh Treaty has been approved, has been more of a no-brainer kind of argument. But so basically they were digitizing all these books. They weren't making them like available whole scale. What they were doing, and through the Hathi Trust review project, was at Michigan, they farm out to a bunch of librarians. They look through these books, the ones especially published between 1923 and 1968, and they look to see whether the book complied with copyright formalities, because in that era, if you did not comply, your book may be in the public domain. And then, so they would have librarians looking through them very carefully. For instance, a copyright notice or lack thereof. With no copyright notice, then they could make the book available. So that's part of the rationale behind digitizing these books, is kind of preemptive to say, well, if they are public domain, let's make them available. And that, I think, is why the publishers were unhappy. Because
they were unhappy. I mean, the thing that was so weird about the unhappiness, so because we had these conversations, because we were just starting the Durationator, we got asked to go to Google to talk about what we were doing. It was all very super exciting as a baby professor. So they had that one side of it where they were like trying to find works that were in the public domain, and they were being careful and all that kind of stuff, right? They were doing all that work. And then on the other side of it, they were just scanning stuff, right? So they were like, we're going to just show snippets. The people that got weird about it, and it was mostly academic libraries. So most of the times academics we'll talk about your book, your new book, but we don't really make money on our academic books. I mean, we make some, or on case books. But it was the Authors Guild, and it wasn't people that was one of the arguments that people made about the lawsuit, is that their books really weren't in the library. Like, the Authors Guild are like popular authors, right? Like, mystery writers and romance writers and things like that. And so it was this kind of weird, interesting disjunction between the Authors Guild suing over this thing, but that they were doing academic libraries. And so there was always that weird disconnect of like, So it was interesting.
Well,
an interesting
academic
time.
libraries, though, have all sorts of things, right? It's funny because I was just talking to one of our undergraduate librarians, and he was saying how he was very disappointed about our collection policy at the undergrad, because now we're getting into more like popular reading and like fiction for young adults, and he said he wanted to buy like copyright books, and he's like really interested about copyright, and he said I don't feel like that's within our collection policy right now. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
We really are in the business of entertaining undergrads,
Right.
And our residence hall library, for instance, is really into fiction. And
interesting.
Last time I went there, I just found a bunch of books that were really fascinating and fun. And they're not really into, especially residence hall, they're not into the educational side as much. Now they do have some, but like they're really into like, hey, come and read this fun book. And actually, in my view, that does lead to long time learning, because I'm still an avid reader, and of course my daughter is young, and I'm encouraging her to read. And reading, we all know, is a pathway to education and to understanding and to language and to all of the things. But I think fiction is also a good thing to encourage, even among college students.
Yeah, totally.
So,
it was super interesting. So, okay. So that's a whole. So where are we? So that was really the first time we see people. So libraries used to collect stuff, but they didn't make copies of things, right? And then the world changed. They made photocopies. Somebody asked for a chapter interlibrary loan or something like that. But there wasn't wholesale copying because we didn't have digitization. But with Google, we get digitization. And we get a huge shift in what the libraries do, right? Would you say that that's part of the big shift of digitization that happens? Technology.
I do. I think so. I think with the World Wide Web, we've had just the ability to make library holdings available at a much broader scale. And so that's part of the reason the title to my book is it's Copyright Conversations, because it's meant to be, hey, we're experts, but we're trying to speak in a way that everyone can understand.
Right.
And we're talking about rights literacy in the digital age, because we're not talking about, hundreds of years ago. This is modern era where it is at your fingertips to scan an entire book and upload it. I mean, I'm not saying that's a fair use, but we can do that, right? It sometimes is with HathiTrust.
It's morality or law or rules, not technology. Technology allows us to do a whole lot of stuff now.
Correct. And so what we're trying to do, I see a crossroads between information literacy and copyright. And so in librarianship, we're constantly talking about information literacy, right? Which is the folks, the students, the public, librarians understanding how to access information, what information is accurate, what information is not, say a peer-reviewed journal versus, fake news. And now we have this push towards copyright literacy, because so many people are engaging with copyrighted materials so quickly and so easily on the internet, in their daily lives, right, on Facebook, on Pinterest. I know you did a whole study on Pinterest.
Yes,
it was so
I did.
Fascinating.
Early.
I assign it to my students.
That's so funny. It was like at the very
Yeah.
beginning of Pinterest. It was so early, my article on Pinterest, that when I called to talk to them and asked them if I could talk to their attorney, they didn't have one. And they asked me to talk to somebody at USC who liked Pinterest. Like, that was their response. That's how early that article was.
It's still
so
relevant.
crazy.
It's still so relevant. That's the
so
thing about it. I mean,
crazy.
I have my students read it because they don't think about the way that they interact in their non-professional lives, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
they're going to be librarians, but they also need to work with our patrons. And our patrons, like them as human beings, as normal people, are on Twitter daily, are on Facebook daily, are retweeting, repinning, all of these things.
Yes, totally. Exactly. And so... so tell us a little. So tell me how the book came about and what the experience has been like doing a book.
Well, so it came about because, when I started a few years ago as an academic librarian, I wasn't really sure where my research was going to take me, what kind of topic I wanted to focus on. But when I learned more about information literacy, I realized immediately that that was where I fit in. And in regards to copyright literacy, because I consider myself, an advocate for information and education to the public and to my patrons and to other librarians, all about how to understand copyright law and not be afraid of it, right? My chapter in the book is titled Fear and Fair Use, Addressing the Effective Domain, because I think a lot of folks, especially librarians that I meet, are a little bit afraid to exercise fair use because they think they're going to get, a huge lawsuit on their hands. And so I really wanted to kind of address that head on and say, hey, fair use is a right, and if we don't use it, we lose it, and we need to really, I'm not saying do it without thought. I'm not saying do it without good faith, but we still need to have, we need to be empowered to use those rights. And so one of the things that I really try to do through my iSchool teaching and through my teaching at the library and through my patron one-on-one meetings is to empower folks to understand copyright. I don't practice law as a librarian. I give people access to information, and then I try to empower them to make their own good decisions. So I don't make decisions. I don't tell people this is a fair use, this isn't a fair use, right? Yeah. So that the book is so I felt like, okay, information literacy is great. This is where I fit in, and copyright literacy is a real issue. We really need more information that's good, that empowers people to understand their copyrights. And so I reached out to a bunch of other copyright librarians who do the similar work that I do, and I said, hey, do you engage in advocacy and speaking with others to empower them to use copyright in a positive way? And they said, oh, of course we do. And I said, well, would you like to write a chapter for this book? And that's how it came out.
And very cool.
I saw different areas kind of naturally arise that people, when folks were proposing chapters, so I had, the copyright librarian's role in advocacy as a set of chapters, and that's where my chapter about fair use fits in. Mm-hmm. And then I had a whole bunch of chapters about education, and one of them is like, how do you self-educate yourself about copyright if you don't know anything? How do you learn this stuff? And I love that chapter in particular because it has a bunch of quality resources. So it's really easy to go and find bad information about copyright. Right. But it's harder to find the good stuff.
Right. I agree.
And then I have research and policy. So like, how do you advocate for good copyright policy on the national level? And then international issues. I have a few international chapters as well. So I thought it was a good breadth. Obviously, it's not going to be, all encompassing of everything you ever needed to know about copyright, but it's a very good start, especially if you're new to it and you want kind of an overview of different kinds of issues from people who are trustworthy, experts, people who know what they're talking about. I had just a wonderful time working with the authors and reading their work and giving them, little pushes and nudges along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So when did you start? Let's do a little bit more about the book, and then I want to come back to specific topics. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds good.
Okay. So tell me, when did you? So the book is coming out now, right? October?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's coming out this month.
So tell me the timeline. How long did it take to do? What was the process like?
It's taken a long time. I think it's been about 2 years,
Wow.
But mainly that's because of the editors on the other side, because my authors have been really good at meeting deadlines. So, we had we had the first deadline of the rough draft, and the authors all, got that into me pretty well on time. That was a few months in, and then I had to turn that around to them, so it gave me a few months to edit them and send them back. Mm-hmm. And then they would send me another draft, And then sometimes we'd have back and forth about certain little things. But for the most part, I think the book was in a pretty good shape after about a year. But then it went over to ACRL, and getting them to go through it, because it's a pretty lengthy book. It's a big book, because there are about 21 chapters. And so that took some time to get their editor. Their editor was so good and so thoughtful, but it took a long time to get those edited chapters back. Yeah. So that, I mean, I think that was the biggest waiting period, was like through the editor side. But once they came back to me, in the final proof, it was in really good shape. So it's just been longer on that side. I had a really great experience editing a volume. I've heard horror stories where people say, don't ever do it because, just write the book yourself. It's easier. But I had a great time because my authors were wonderful to work with. So it was a pleasure to work with them. And I think, if you know who you're working with, I think that's good. If you have, most of my authors are lawyers. They know how to write, you know how law school is,
right.
A lot of writing involved. So, so it was a pleasure to do. It did take a long time for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. And then for each of the, logistics of the book, so you're the editor of the book. On terms of like royalty, and everyone submits their article. They don't get paid for articles. Like, people don't understand academics. Did you pay them? You didn't pay them?
No. They're
yeah.
I mean, usually people in academics are doing their writing for either for tenure and promotion or just for the public good, right? So they're
That's right.
Or both. I mean, in my case, it's both.
And then when you do a collection like this, the royalty scheme goes back to you as editor, right? They don't expect, again, they're writing for their reputation, all of that. They're not expecting like 20 cents or $50 or something like that for their individual articles. The royalty rate goes back to you. Is that right?
That's true. I think that a great portion of it goes to the publisher, and I really
a lot goes to the publisher.
A lot, most
of
it.
Like at least the contracts that I've helped with, with our faculty, you're not getting very much. I mean, this is a conversation that people are having on the quilt side of like self-publishing versus the being with something. Like, you're with ALA, right? Is it ALA that's doing it?
Well, this is through ACRL, but it's also affiliated with ALA. Yes,
big library stuff. So it's important, and it's cultural capital, and it's important to have it there with that. And so we see on the quilting side that there are major publishers, and the reason you're publishing with that is it's legitimacy to be publishing there. It's not about making money, even if you're like, rarely are these books making enough. I mean, some can hit and there'll be millions or whatever, but. So that a lot of the quilters are now going to self-publishing, and it's in part because they're not getting much. They're not getting much support from the publishers. They're not getting advances. They're not getting, even the copies are like, they're getting, basically they can buy copies of their own books. So academics write sort of what comes back, because you're in your collection, just because the editor's not making tons off of this. And then I think you were going to talk a little bit about open access as well. So explain that sort of the publishing side to us. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can, totally.
Okay. All right, great. So the royalties generally do go to the editor, but one of the reasons I am glad that I published this through ACRL, which is the Association of College and Research Libraries, is that they actually do support quite a bit of open access. Even though the book itself, if you want to buy the whole thing, is for sale, the individual chapters, they allow authors to choose a Creative Commons license. And many of the authors did so. And so you could piece together the book at different institutional repositories. But one of the things that I love about it is that I'm going to use the parts of the book to teach at the iSchool. And I can just provide those chapters to my students as long as I retain the license on them and cite them correctly.
Okay, so tell us, just in case people don't know, tell us what because I'm advocating that for the quilting community as well, and they're not as familiar with it. Explain Creative Commons and why it's so cool.
Yeah, so Creative Commons is a way, I explain it to folks as like a license between me and everybody. So instead of being a one-to-one license, like a license between me and like say a publisher, it's a license between me and the public telling them how they can use my work. And so for instance, on my chapter in this book, I put a Creative Commons attribution license on it, which means that so long as you cite me and the book and where you got the book from appropriately. And I usually just advocate for people using academic type attribution. It's pretty common, right? You put the name of the author, you put the name of the book, the editor, and the year, and all those things. Then you can use my book for whatever you like. You can create a derivative work, you can put it in a compilation, you can commercialize it, you can do whatever you want. And it's a pretty broad license. And I am doing the work that I do not to make money. As you were noting, even with this book, even though I'm the editor and I get royalties, I'm not in it for money because I don't expect to get a ton of money back. I'm in it to, give out good copyright information. And I think the same way that my authors are not expecting any money because they don't get paid because they're not the editor. They also are doing it for, for their own like credibility and goodwill, right, and moving forward in their career, but also to give back to the community. And so I think Creative Commons licenses are a good way, if you're really not in it to make money, to make your work available so that people don't feel scared, because a lot of people are scared to assert fair use or to ask for permission. So they don't feel scared of violating copyright by using your work, right? Mm-hmm. So you just let them use it according to the terms of the Creative Commons license. And I tend to use the broadest license possible. I've never used CC0 because I do think it's important for people to attribute my work, but I do tend to use a CC BY or attribution license because I find that a lot of folks are confused about a lot of the other licenses, like the non-commercial license. They'll say, well, what does commercial mean? And then they're not sure. And right, then it creates more possible people who wanted to use the work who are afraid to use it. And I don't want to create fear. I want people to use work and feel good about it.
I hear you. Okay, so let's go back into a couple of things. So for those listening, Creative Commons, you can go to creativecommons.org. Mm-hmm. And you can put in what you want. So usually I think you have to have attribution now. They've changed that. So it's attribution. Then you can have people, you can share it, but you also have to share it under the same terms, or you can have non-commercial or commercial uses. But what you do is you create a license so that anybody coming to that can know how they can use it without having to ask permission directly from the author. CC0 is an interesting one because what you're trying to do is disclaim that you have any interest in the copyright, which is challenging legally, but you can try to do that with that. That's the intention of it by putting CC0 on a work, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
Yep.
And so in our copyright book that will be out in a while, we'll have a lot on sort of licensing and choosing licenses and all that. But for now, if you're interested, if someone's listening and you're like, oh, that sounds interesting, go to creativecommons.org and it'll explain it to you. That system, the Creative Commons system, started with Larry Lessig when he was at Stanford at the Center for Internet and Society, right? And he really wanted a way for people, when they came across something, to be able to, before Creative Commons, you'd have to make a contract with the author, and this allowed for lots of things to be out on the internet, know exactly how you're going to use it, and not have to ask that it was out there. So I'm still at the center. He's not there anymore, but as a non-resident fellow. So, and that started again the same time the Google Books is starting, because we're suddenly putting things on the internet, and so thinking about that sort of how do you share and allow people to know more than just all rights reserved starts about the same time, which is really interesting. Okay.
That's right.
So the book. So the book is published. What do you do now that the book is published besides just like rest? Like, tell me, like, do you have plans? Do you have to like promote it? Like, what happens to the book now?
That's a great question. I know ACRL will promote the book. They have the option of doing a webinar to kind of promote thoughts that are in the book, kind of like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm also promoting the book through an ACRL webinar that's happening during Open Access Week. Cool. So I was invited by ACRL to talk about open access, and I'm going to use that opportunity to talk about open educational resources, which are basically like anything that people create for education that has an open license on it. And so I'm going to talk about that the week of Open Access Week, which is in a couple weeks. Yeah. And at the end, I'll kind of say, and if you would like to learn more about copyright, here's this book you can order. And then what my plan is, I'm actually writing another book for the American Library Association this time. And this time I'm writing it myself. So it's not an edited volume. It's going to be a solo authored work. And it's titled something tentatively like Compact Copyright, Common Questions and Answers, or something like that. And it's very very quick and dirty guide to copyright, where I go through the law. So I'll have like an excerpt of the law that I'm talking about, and then I'll have the discussion of the law, and then tools that you can find online, and then hypothetical questions, and I'll write an answer to them. So
that'll be fun.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
I think the reason I'm writing this book is because I really would have liked it when I had started. Yeah. When I was a brand new baby copyright librarian 3 years ago, this is the book that would have been magical for me. And there are plenty of books out there. Don't get me wrong. There are plenty of books out there on academic copyright and things like that. But this book is a little different because it's meant to be a reference guide, and you can jump in. So say you have a fair use question, you can jump to that section and you'll see, here's a law, here's what it means, here's some, checklists and tools, and here is hypothetical, here's what to do if this person asks you this question. And there's just nothing like that out there. And so that's why I felt compelled to write it, because I really want to help people. I want people to have this. I want to help. I want to go back and help myself 3 years ago. I wish I had it.
That's exactly. I'm always writing for my old self. I mean, the whole reason I'm here is because my old self, my grad self, couldn't figure out the copyright issues. So I went to law school after grad school. So I mean, I think we always are trying to help what we can't find, so that others don't struggle in the same way. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that my little sister, I'm going to make her listen to this podcast because her name is Becca, and she always said, I'm doing my master's. I'm like, oh, what are you doing it on? And she goes, well, it's called me search. When you do research, but it's really about yourself. It's me search.
I like that.
And I said, you're so right, because we really research what we're passionate about, and what we're passionate about is what we want to know, right?
Exactly.
And it is me search. And there are so many people who go into psychology because they had so many difficult issues, for instance, like growing up, and then they're trying to solve those issues for other people going through the same things, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and so I always, I just always think of her when I get into some area of research, and I think it's so fascinating. And I think, oh, it's me search.
Totally. That's very funny. Okay, so now we're to the meaty stuff. I have like 3 topics for you. I want to look at fair use, copying in libraries, and plagiarism. Can we look at those 3, talk about a little bit about each of those a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So let's talk about copying. So we have a lot of questions that come up about, can you copy a book? Can you not copy a book? What happens if you check a book out at a library? Sort of, what is the patron's relationship to copyright and copying with a book that is under copyright?
Mm-hmm. So that is largely on the patron's shoulders, because we have an exception in the Copyright Act that allows us as librarians and libraries to avoid liability if we put a handy little sign near all of our scanning machines. Nowadays it's scanning machines, not those like paper copy machines. But same thing, right? And we put a sign there that says, these materials are covered by copyright laws, and you need to follow them. But we also, at my library, and we got this from University of Michigan, we say, but we also want to tell you about fair use, and go look that up, right? Because that's really where they're going to make their copying, unless the book is in the public domain, which
then it doesn't matter.
Then it doesn't matter if it was published before 1924, and that's a moving target, right? So January 1st of 2020, everything from 1924 is going to enter the public domain, so we'll say before 1925. But if it's in copyright, which a lot of stuff is, then they'll have to make a decision about fair use. Are they copying it for personal use, for research use, for non-commercial use, for educational use? Are they copying a small amount?
So let's walk through this. So first of all, there's the reality. There's all kinds of things here. Okay, so I'm a patron. I remember the first time I saw those big scanning machines so I was a researcher who loved to copy lots of things, so much so that when I was a grad school student, I bought my own copy machine to copy books in my privacy of my own home. So I don't know. I think it's personal use, but I was a little out of control. So so I remember being at the Holocaust, the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and in the research, and they had these beautiful scanners, and I was like, my little grad school self, like now years later, was like, oh my God, I would have been a maniac in that library, right? Because I would have been like, I have, a week here, I'm copying everything I possibly can to bring it home. So on that level, somebody like me, grad student person, who's like, I'm doing research, I need this, I want to copy as much as I possibly can. What do you say to them? Do you think that falls under fair use? Or do you think we have to be more selective with a book when we're at that scanner? And I know that's getting into a fair use analysis. So there's that first scenario. Then sort of like we go to the library, we check out a book from the library, public library. What can we do with it? Can we copy it all? Should we only copy little bits? So how do we understand? And quilters are always sort of asking this. Like, if we're not allowed to copy a pattern and give it to, and keep it and give it to our friends, how are we allowed to go to the library, copy a book, and return the book? So this is so help us understand that, and maybe it is going through a fair use analysis.
Yeah, so fair use is a flexible test, but it has 4 parts to the test, and everything is done on a case-by-case basis. And of course, it is a defense to copyright infringement, so you can still be sued, and you have to defend your use in court. So that it always involves a risk assessment.
All right, now I have to ask you one question, because this comes up all the time. Have we had any situations where like individuals have been sued for the amount they've copied in a library?
Oh, in a library. I mean, I don't know of that specifically. Yeah. But I do know, I don't, are you familiar with the very famous case of Jason Schwartz? That was slightly different, but it did involve library holdings. It involved, involved like a licensing issue, right? Because he was trying to copy all sorts of like ProQuest documents and like free them for the world because he believed in open access.
Right. That's different though, don't you think?
It was different. It was different. That's why I'm saying like that's the most analogous case I can think of.
So,
I mean, yeah, so patron copying is not usually the issue. Now, you also are familiar with the Georgia State case, which involved faculty copying and more of the institutional things. So you're right. I mean, how much risk is there? Probably not a ton, right? If you're doing it for personal purposes. Now, if you scan it, but then you put it on your personal website, but your website
bad.
Is
so bad.
Bad idea.
So bad. So, so scan it and put it on Facebook. Really bad, like really, like you're a bad person. That's a bad thing to do, right? Scan it so that you can do some research or think through things, or you've copied part of a book for it because you're gonna use it for your personal use. I'm okay with that. Are you okay with that too?
No, I think that's right, and I think that on a technicality basis, if you look at fair use, would it say it's a fair use? Well, if you're copying an entire book in its entirety, generally speaking, I would tell someone you should just check out the book. Right? And you should buy the book, right? There are a lot of things you could do.
And that's because you're doing an analysis of market replacement, that all you're doing is making a copy. And the fourth factor tells you that if you're just doing it to make it because it's cheaper to do it this way, that's not fair use.
Right. Yeah. So that's why it's like if you're copying like, okay, a chapter of a book or 3 chapters or whatever, and because you don't have want to check out the whole thing, or you need the checkout is like on reserve and you have to give it back in 2 hours. Like I get that, but copying the whole thing, not the same thing. And so I think that's where I personally look at it. But the reality is, as you were saying, like, what's the likelihood of getting sued? And sometimes I've had conversations, and Kenneth Cruz and I were on a panel at Miami University just recently, and we were saying, like, there are times when we will just shrug and say, that's not necessarily like lawful, but we think it should be. For instance, we were saying when you show a Netflix film in class, in a face-to-face teaching class,
this is just
right?
This is silly, right? Go ahead.
It's silly because you're violating your license with Netflix that says you're using it for personal use, and yet every single student in your class has a Netflix license, so they could all log in all at once and watch it on their personal device, right?
Right.
And so that's the thing. And we've also, librarians know this, that we've tried to negotiate for years with Netflix and said, hey, libraries will pay you. We want to show these films. And they say, we don't want to talk to you.
They want
that's one of those things where we shrug our hands and say, is it technically illegal? Probably. Is Netflix going to sue you for it?
No.
Likely not. I have heard of them suing University of California, by the way, but University of California, I think, asserted sovereign immunity and all this stuff. So I have heard of them doing it, but that would be like if I had an institutional policy which said everyone show Netflix all the time, right?
Yeah, right.
Which I'm not saying.
No.
I want to be clear. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, it's silly.
Well, and there's the other thing that's so crazy about that one is that the Copyright Act allows us as instructors to publicly display and perform things. So it isn't that we're not allowed to do that. So if we got a DVD and we put it in the machine, that would be fine, right?
Yep.
Like we would not be.
Yep.
So
and
I think there's an argument that, I know that the contract outweighs the law, but I think it's not. It's in this 110 is in the spirit of the law, letting you show it. Like it's their fault, right?
That's right. And the problem, we've come into that problem, right, with a lot of streaming services. Like when we want to show something in an online class, suddenly we can't show, what we want to show because we'd have to rip the DVD. And then we get into the DMCA, which is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which has protections against breaking the technical lock. And you get into all sorts of problems. And it's really frustrating. It's one of those issues where copyright law has not caught up with the digital age, right? And so even though copyright law says, in face-to-face teaching, you can show the full movie of Coco, but you can't just show parts of it because if I don't want to sit there and fast forward it to the part that I want to show, I want to rip the DVD and just show that little part. It's like that you can do that actually under a DMCA exception, and but you have to assert fair use to do it,
right?
So
it's interesting, isn't it?
It's very frustrating.
Okay.
There are those circumstances where you say, oh my gosh, copyright has not caught up.
No, and it's always in that situation. That's historically for 300 years. It's just always catching up to technology, that's just part of what it is. Okay, so let's go back to I actually did. I went to my New Orleans Public Library and I checked some books out and I read them and they were awesome and I'm returning them. Now, if I found a book that I really, really wanted, I think I would buy it. But if I copied it, there's some parts I have to copy because it tells me to copy things, right? Like parts of the pattern and things like that. That's totally allowable because the author assumes that if you're going to do applique, you have to make copies of that. So can I make copies for my friends? If I go to the library, I copy it, then I hand it out to friends? Sort of how far does my copies go in that scenario? If I bought the book,
right?
How far can it go?
One of the considerations for whether something is a fair use is how much you're distributing it, right? That's why you're saying don't put it on Facebook versus how many friends are you giving it to? This is the thing that the digital age makes so easy, right?
Yeah.
That we can just send an email to 500 people.
That's
so,
right. Yep.
so I think like that's the question is like, how many people are you giving it to? And like, if it's a quote, I'll give you an example. Like a classic example of fair use is like a block quotation from a book, right?
Right.
It's a fairly large amount sometimes, but I'm using it for critique. I'm using it for comment in a paper. And let's say I post that paper on the internet for everyone to see.
Right.
That doesn't make it not a fair use. So, I mean, if it's a small enough amount that it's a classic fair use.
It's fair use includes criticism and commentary, transformative, all that kind of stuff. But also, I think for quilters who are making copies at Kinko's or at their local library, if you feel like your copy is a market replacement for buying it, you have gone too far.
I agree.
Right?
I agree with that for sure.
Okay.
That's the heart of fair use, right? A lot of judges have said that is the most important thing.
And so it helps us understand how far they can go with their friends, because if you make a copy of something and you give it to your friend, that is a market replacement for your friend buying it. And so that's
could be,
why,
or it might not be. It depends on what you copied, right?
Well, let's say if you have a pattern, right? So explain that to me. So you're saying that if I just copy a couple pages from it and I hand it to a friend, that's fine because it's fine. But if I copy more of it, is it about quantity here, or
it's about a couple things? It's about quantity and quality, right? Because one of the things that fair use considers is whether you take quote unquote the heart of the work.
Right.
So what is the heart of the work? I would say in quilting, the heart of the work probably is that pattern, right? Because that's what people want. They don't want the instructions for the pattern.
Well, they do actually. I mean, that's the part that's so interesting is
Okay.
that, so here's a couple of things that kind of make it a snafu. So first, a lot of patterns are in the public domain because of common blocks or shapes or all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Secondly, the directions really aren't protectable, right?
Right.
Instructions. So the selection, arrangement, coordination of a particular book or pattern are protectable. And the images are protectable. So you get into a funny situation of like, okay, well, what if I copy something that's not protectable from a book? How far can I go with it? You know?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, right? Because like this is the problem with fair use is also I don't know what a judge would say. And that's why I can usually never tell someone this is a fair use or this is not a fair use, because the reality is that you're predicting what a judge would say. And predicting what a judge would say is impossible because, you know, when I practiced law, which was back a long time ago in another life, you know, I would have a motion. I was mostly doing motions because I was a baby lawyer, but I would have a motion. I would say, we're going to win this motion. I know we're going to win. And we would lose. Right. Who knows why, right? And then I would say the next day, well, we're going to lose this. And we'd win. So again, predicting what a judge is going to do.
And the thing that's so interesting about this is that, well, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think the small claims court's ever going to happen?
Oh, boy. I hope not.
It changes everything,
the
right?
Current proposal.
I know.
Yeah, so there's a current proposal in the legislature for the Case Act, which would essentially create a small claims court. But the interesting part about it is that they want to have the Copyright Office judiciate these cases, which I find ridiculous. They can't even keep up with modernizing the copyright, right now.
Because they do. It's so interesting. That act. So I always say that if that does, like, if it sneaks through somehow, because a lot of people don't like it, but we live in very weird times. So if it sneaks through, it changes copyright completely. Like all the conversations we're having, we got to have them again because. But I think what's so interesting, I don't know if you noticed this, they're requiring you to have a registration certificate to go to small claims, which means that it's not for the everyday people still. Like most people aren't registering their, that cuts out a lot of it, or it changes it so that everybody
is this just
does,
really is this just really a way for them to make money for the Copyright Office? Like more people are going to send in their money, right? I don't know, right? Because they're actually going to up the registration cost is going to go up. It's been like $55 for such a long time. They realize that's not enough, and soon it's going to be $95 if that hasn't happened already, which I think it hasn't, but
no,
I know
don't think it has. Yeah,
I know it's on the cusp because they've been talking about it for a while. And so wouldn't it be sad and weird if that happened at the same time. Oh,
Yeah.
all of a sudden registration cost is doubled. And by the way, you have to register before you sue. And so everyone might start thinking, oh, I should do this, even though they had to do it anyway to sue in court, but they weren't going to do that. But nobody was
suing. I mean, that's the thing is when I ask you how many patrons have gotten, gotten sued for copyright infringement, 0, right? So, but if the small claims court happens, that's under $5,000 harm, and so it changes the game completely. It's for fanfic, for all the fan art, for like everything changes, because now you can go after people for small bits, Well, so,
and then the question becomes who will. I mean, still a lot of the stuff is going to be owned by the big people, like the publishers, right? Are the ones who would have to go after the fan fiction people and. Are they going to do it?
I don't think so. I
have
mean,
the answer to that.
Their ecosystem so depends on the fans. I don't think it's them that's going to – I think it's going to be the trolls, and I think it's going to be the small-time players who get upset with somebody and take them to small claims. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that it'll be weird, strange cases that you're like, really? Right?
Yeah.
So
those already happen. I mean, those already happen with copyright trolls, and they also happen with someone who's like, I'm a photographer and I gave you this photo, but I didn't give you permission to do X, Y, and Z, and then they end up losing because it's actually a fair use or an implied license.
Exactly.
But they're going to still now even be more further motivated to come forward.
The other weird thing about that piece of legislation, I don't know if can you tell I've had to research it? The other part that's really weird is, when you do a notice and takedown right now, like in 512 on a platform, so somebody's using your stuff, you tell them it's infringing, the platform takes it down, then you go, no, it's fair use, it goes back up. You'll have to go to the small claims court, and you have to have a copyright registration and certificate to be able to go to small claims, and you have to do that within 12 days. So it just changes the game in these crazy ways. And then also anybody can opt out of it. So there's no the whole thing is bizarre. So it probably
it is bizarre.
A lot of people say it's not going to get passed, and I think that's great. But I also think we live in really weird times. So
and there are a lot of people who think that it's actually not a terrible idea, but it's just poorly drafted, which I think is true often. I mean, if you look at the Teach Act as a classic example of legislation that was a great idea.
Right.
The Teach Act is for online teaching instead of face-to-face teaching, which exactly what we were talking about, trying to show a movie online, right? Sounds like a great idea, but terrible, terrible legislation where they just have so many hoops you have to jump through that nobody uses it. I mean, we don't use it. And
part of it was because everyone was so afraid, the content owners, of giving permission for things to be like Netflix to be on, in a digital classroom. So, it's got this really interesting history of weirdness. All right, so fair use. So so don't be a jerk. Don't put it online. If you're gonna copy the whole book, go buy it. And then sometimes you've got situations where it's out of print, or you've interlibrary loaned it, or things like that. And I think in that situation, you can't find a copy. So here's what I would say. If you can't find a copy at Amazon reasonably, you can't find a copy to check out in your local library, and you do get an interlibrary loan copy, I think for personal use, making a copy of it is totally okay, because you've done everything you can. And particularly if you need to use it, over a period of time, because interlibrary loan is such a fast, short period of time. That would be that sounds like a lot like, it sounds like the time displacement theory that we use for DVRs, right? Yeah,
that they said was a fair use. It's like I can't use it in these 2 hours or what have you. Yeah, but I mean, still not the whole thing, right? But the parts that you need or what have you.
Yeah,
for sure.
Or just be like me and buy your own copy machine. Now you don't need it. You just have everybody has scanners. But this is in the 90s. I was this ridiculous machine that my parents were I had to decide if I was going to get a new computer or a copy machine. And I was and I was doing World War I stuff, so it was really hard to find the stuff I was looking at. So interlibrary loan was all I was doing. And I remember I was nope, I don't want anyone telling me how much I can copy. I want to copy these whole books. So buying a copy machine. And so,
wow. Well, nowadays, a lot of interlibrary loan happens with PDF copies, right?
Yeah, right.
They don't send the whole book because you'll be requesting a chapter or whatever, a certain amount of pages. If you're requesting the whole book and they don't mind sending it, that's of course, a first sale right that they can do, but like then they're at risk that they won't get it back.
Right. No, totally. So it's so interesting. And then of course everybody takes pictures on their phone. So like,
oh my gosh, yes.
Come on.
So much of that.
So much of that. So, so yeah, the world has changed because I'm old. Okay, plagiarism. What's the difference between plagiarism and copyright?
Yeah, so one of the chapters in my book talks about this, I think, in the education part.
I know that. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I explain it as one is an academic norm and one is a legal norm, right? One is a law. And so, the academic norm says, like, if you plagiarize, if you copy someone's words without attribution,
we're going to hate you forever.
You can get like an F on a paper. You might even get kicked out of school. But
yeah, you can't sit for the bar sometimes if you do it, right? If you get put on honor code, you won't be able to sit for the bar. And then,
but then the issue for the legal issue is you might get fined or even like criminal prosecution, which is really rare. But if it was really, really bad, and that's different. And also, the considerations are different. So something could be plagiarism, but it could be a fair use. Right. Because
or in the public domain, right?
Right. So if something's in the public domain, but you put the whole dang thing in your paper, you're committing plagiarism because you're not using your own words, but you're not violating copyright.
Right,
so,
exactly.
And also fair use, now it's good to cite things, and fair use, sometimes judges would view that favorably if you cited it because it doesn't look like you're trying to steal it. But often it doesn't really matter for fair use whether you cite it or not. But I always encourage folks, of course, in academics to cite things because A, it looks better for fair use, and B, that's what we're supposed to be teaching people is to cite things. So, but they are different, and a lot of folks in academia get a little bit confused about the two and where they.
Yeah, and then I think there's one more is piracy. I think piracy is a form of infringement, but I think it's different than. I mean, I think it's easy to sort of say, did you make a full copy of that and post it on the internet? That to me seems much more like piracy than just. You don't have to really do an infringement analysis, is what I'm saying. It's like you're pirate.
Yeah, I mean, piracy is more like stealing, just like a bad motive, right?
Exactly.
Because there's this famous term called copy fraud that Jason Mazzone at the law school at University of Illinois coined a while back, and it was basically coined for folks who are putting things online that are in the public domain, but saying that they own them in copyright.
Yeah, that's bad too. That's another one, right?
So he called it copy fraud. And I said, look, I don't know if it's fraudulent though, because they're doing it not intentionally.
Are they though? I mean, think about all those weird, I have a heart, so I do a ton on copyright and duration. All of these companies that have locked up public domain, these databases that take public domain works, they're the only place you can get to them, and then they put these contracts on them so that you can't do certain things. That, I think, is fraudulent. That, I think, is uncool and rude, because I get why they're doing it for competition. They don't want their competition, but it isn't in the spirit of what they're making money off of things that are in the public domain, and then they're putting restriction on it so other people can't use it. And I think that's just so uncool.
Yeah, that was like the Getty does that with photographs.
Yeah,
I agree. But I think a lot of what he was talking about were like libraries, I guess. So I think when libraries do it, I think they're genuinely like not understanding. Is my thought.
Yeah.
I'd agree with you. There are times when it is copy fraud, when it's like, oh my gosh, these people are just, just being in bad faith, trying to make money off of things that they don't even really like own the rights to, right? They might own the physical thing or what have you.
But they're suddenly claiming
but when a library does it, I think they're usually just doing it out of ignorance. And I'm not saying it's good. It's definitely not good. But I think that they just need to be educated. So I guess I feel like in that case, I call it copy ignorance, not copy fraud.
Right. No, I think that makes sense, and I think that's true of a lot of people that's part of your plan is to, your book is aimed at other librarians, I would think, right? Because it's the price.
Of course it's published through the American Library Association. So I think those are the folks who are going to find it most easily. Yeah.
Yeah. So insanely cool. Okay. What was our other one? We had plagiarism. Oh, we did them, right? Fair use.
The only other thing I wanted to plug is for
Yeah.
quilters.
Yeah.
Nancy Sims, her discussion.
Her
She
discussion is
wrote,
interesting because she that's in your book too, right? So
yes.
Nancy Sims. So she goes to she gets asked to a quilt guild, and it looks like it's a guild. She doesn't say that, but it looks like it's a guild. And she's not really prepared for what they ask her, which are fairly sophisticated questions. And in the little paragraph, she says, I start to think about it differently, which is kind of what happened to me too, right? These are very sophisticated people using intellectual property in really interesting ways. And so her experience is very much my experience, except I just like went maniac and did this project, right? She was like, whoa, that's weird. I haven't gone back to it. So tell us a little bit about what she says about quilters in that, and we'll talk a little bit more about.
So she's talking about in this book in general, or in her chapter, about who kids these days, they know more about copyright than you think, and basically saying they don't know any less than anybody else, right? And people are always saying, oh, the kids are violating this, violating that. And she's like, no, they're like it's different cultural norms. And so she uses the example of quilters because she goes in there, guns blazing, ready to teach them about, public domain and what's not copyright protected. And she said they got very upset with her because she was telling them some of those things you mentioned earlier, like the instructions that are most important, or like the things they put their heart into, like these patterns that are actually like not copyrightable. And the folks were getting upset with her because she said she didn't realize that every single person who has a piece in making the quilts gets attributed, and that's not a copyright norm, that's a quilting norm. And she said they were getting upset with her because she was trying to like advocate for the public domain, and they were like, no, we want to protect all these people and their rights. And she's like, they don't have any rights. And then they got very upset. And I think it's really interesting because she said, it's important to know that.
And I don't think, I think that it's more complicated than they don't have rights. I think that that's what's so interesting about it. And I think it is that intersection of copyright and custom. So, and we see this with the poets, we see this with documentary filmmakers, we see it with, that's the best practices that we've had Pat on the show. I don't think we've aired Pat's episode, but we had Pat on the show who does the best practices stuff. And so, the work that I've been doing is really about, first of all, it's about, that pattern maker worked really hard. Sure. That may be in the public domain, but the convenience of the directions is what you're paying for, not the copyright. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I think is that there is multiple layers of artists sometimes working on a quilt, and sometimes it's not terribly clear what's under copyright and what isn't, but the selection, arrangement, coordination of it does create a copyrighted work. Even if they're not registering it, even if it's thin copyright, that creation itself has value and does have some copyright on it. So, I think it's complicated. I think
I agree. I made it sound a little less. I think she was pointing out that some of the things are not copyrighted and things that people feel are valuable to the community.
Totally. And I think that's,
I don't think you can discount that. I don't think you can
totally agree.
Well, just because copyright doesn't protect it, it's not valuable.
Totally
this is one of the things that we've been struggling with the entire world with traditional cultural expressions, right?
Yes,
is that, copyright doesn't recognize it as a community right. And yet it's very valuable to this community, and we need to respect that.
That's
so we copyright folks from around the world are coming together and trying to struggle with, how do we protect these things that are not necessarily recognized under copyright law. And so I think it's really interesting when you go and talk to different groups with different norms. And I think that's what she was saying about, folks who have grown up, with Facebook, with Pinterest, with Twitter, with all these different ways to share immediately at your fingertips. And she was saying that they really understand a lot. And she used YouTube, and I think YouTube's a great example of where they're very savvy. Like they understand that there are things that are on YouTube that are speculative, right, and probably illegal, and like are likely to be taken down, and that there are other things that the copyright owner maybe knows are there that they're willing to tolerate because they'll get money off of through advertisements, right? And so they know what they're talking about, and they know who owns what, and they know a little bit more than people give them credit for. And that there are different morals involved, and there are different ways that they've kind of learned to work within the system.
Yeah, totally. That's right. And and I think it's so fascinating and super cool. I think the other thing that sort of happened with this study, because it's gone on for 2 years, is my concept of copyrights have really changed, and sort of going through the system very in depth. It calls into question our standards, our norms. Other times it makes a lot of sense, right? Like fixation. I get fixation now because like the pain of creating something, like you've got copyright because you've fixed it, you've done it, you've gone from idea to actually making it, and that is very painful sometimes. So you get that kind of, that's the moment fixation. But other parts of the Copyright Act don't really, they're very weird. So that's been like the cool part of the study, is sort of as much turning it back onto copyright to say, do you really think that works? You know, like, so that's
yeah,
been,
I think it's really, I think it's really fascinating. In fact, I actually do lectures at my daughter's school through their library, and I find it really fun because what I do is I have them all on a dry erase board draw something, and I say, okay, well now do you own a copyright? And they say no, and we get through why not, what's original, what's not. But then I erase it. I take a dry erase, and I apologize first because I say, I know this is someone's work of art, and I erase it. And then I say, do you still have a copyright?
Right.
And one of the students looked at me and said, of course I do, because it's like taking a book and throwing it in the trash or burning it. You still own that thing. And I said, oh my gosh, you're so smart, because I said most of my students at the iSchool, when I do the same thing, they can't fathom that you still own it because it's gone.
Interesting.
But it was fixed, right? And the kids got it immediately.
That's really cool. I love that.
It was so cool. And sometimes I'm like, wow, you kids, you are so great. Like, you need to come and visit the iSchool kids. Like,
totally, right.
Yeah. So sometimes we unlearn things like over time. I also find the same way with my law students. I used to teach law school, and sometimes they were so set in the way that they understood the world that they wouldn't be creative in a way with the law.
Yeah.
But if you teach library students or undergrads, they're much more willing. Yeah. Right. They're much more willing to be,
that's right,
vulnerable and think outside the box and think about different ways to do things.
So true. Well, that's what I've been doing with the law students, because we do this immersive research. So like if we're going to study giveaways in the entrepreneurship class, we do a giveaway, and it's kind of that same thing of having to break them out of their kind of law safe space to be like, okay, well, we did it, so what legal issues are now arising? And it's really shifting the conversations, because as you said, they get into this kind of funny space where it's hard for them to be imaginative, and also even see the legal problems because they haven't experienced it, So
I think that's a really good methodology. And I think law students, it's hard in law school to be vulnerable because you're constantly being berated. Like this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough. The Socratic method is very terrifying. And you don't want to look stupid, and you say things you didn't mean, right? Because you just have time to process. And so I think it's hard. So I think it's good to get them out of that thought process and have them experiment a little bit.
It's just scary in a different way is what I say, So, Well, I just think this is so insanely great. You're amazing and great, and I love your stuff. And,
well, thanks so much for having me here, and it was fun talking to you, of course, about copyright and quilting. And I've never been in the quilting realm, but I know it's such a big thing. I mean, I have a colleague of mine who does quilting, and it's just her life. It's great.
Yep.
That's and I respect it. I gardening is more my thing, but
not so much for me. I'm not really good at all that. So that's funny. Well, I just think this is great. I can't wait to see how the book is. And will you come back when your other little book comes out? It would be really fun to chat with you again.
Oh, I would love to.
I would
love to.
Awesome.
That'd be a lot of fun.
All right, cool. Well, hold on just a second while I turn on. Are you cool with this being posted, or do you need to review it?
No, it's good. It's
awesome.
good.
Okay, hold on. Oh, my mouse is not working. Hold on. Okay. Mouse. Okay, cool. Hold on.
So you've been listening to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things.
We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.